Well, as usual, we're trying to feature the background people in Speedway, and although it's a background job, perhaps it's got a high profile for this particular gentleman, Tony Steele. Tony Steele, you're now well affirmed as one of the top referees in Speedway, and we're pleased that we've tracked you down here at Poole this evening. But the question that everybody's going to want to ask, of course, is how do you get to be a referee?
Oh, well, really it depends on really yourself, how much effort you want to put in and whether you really fancy the job when the truth of it all comes out. I started working at Leicester in 1969 and stayed on the track staff there and at King's Lynn for quite a number of years, and then I got to know two referees quite well, Stan Green and Jeff Dolby, both of whom have now sadly passed on, and they got me interested. And I actually saw an advert in the Speedway Star to say there was a shortage of referees, and underwent a couple of interviews and passed a number of tests and eventually got there. So it's open to anybody who really fancies a go, and all they really need to do is just telephone the Speedway Control Board office and they'll send an application form. Oddly enough, there aren't too many people who are queuing up for the job. I can't really understand why. And there's also a fair failure rate in terms of people not failing the test particularly, but dropping out before they get to the end of the training period, because when they realise what it involves, they can't cope with it, either restraints from home or with their job. A lot of people think you turn up at about 7:25, push a few buttons and then go home, and of course it isn't like that at all. You have to get to the track several hours, depending on the sort of meeting you're doing beforehand, to carry out all the pre-meeting checks. And quite often you might be leaving home at dinner time or just after dinner, having been to work in the morning. You then drive, do your track inspection, do the meeting, finish off, do all the paperwork afterwards, and then you've got a long drive home, often getting home at maybe 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And unlike certain riders, I'm sure will smile at this, you can't stop in bed till dinner time. You're up at 7 o'clock to go to work again, because it isn't a full-time job or a profession. You certainly don't earn money that would pay the mortgage from being a Speedway referee.
Certainly you've highlighted that it is an unglamorous position, but it is a very high profile one in terms of what you have to control. Just tell us a little bit about the responsibilities, because although we know that you push the buttons and make the decisions, very hard decisions about the racing, you also have to do an awful lot, as you were just describing, about for instance inspecting the track and checking a lot and filling in forms before the match even gets underway.
It is. I mean, the ultimate responsibility is always the safety, and you can't hide from that at all, because at the end of the day, if somebody gets seriously injured, or I've had the misfortune to have a fatality whilst I've been refereeing, and that's when it really comes home to you how important it is to spend the time to do the job right and make sure the safety aspects of it have all been dealt with properly, because if you've got 1 foot out of line, then you and the control board and the staging promoter are in very serious trouble and can face fairly hefty fines if it was considered that you contributed to a serious injury or a fatality. So that is the ultimate responsibility that you're here to take control of, and that is something that you don't like to dwell on too deeply, because if you did, I'm sure there's a lot of people who do it now probably wouldn't do it at all. But there's not much more you can say about it, really. That is filling in the programmes. If you get blue and it should have been yellow, it's a catastrophe until the next newspaper comes out. But by comparison to what can really go wrong, that is actually a comparatively minor part of it.
Okay, well clearly when you're watching Speedway, you're watching perched high atop in the grandstand. You've got an overall view of everything. Let's just go up there and have a look and see what it's like to view from the box. Well, we've moved up here to the more salubrious surroundings of the referee's box. A privilege for me, but for Tony, this is obviously your regular home at Speedway meetings. Just tell us a little bit about the equipment that we find in front of you, the control panel in particular. I think we're all interested to hear about.
Well, it's quite boring really, and Poole is fairly illustrative of what you normally come across. It's fairly standard in most of the boxes. You've just got the 4 exclusion lights there, which hopefully you don't really want to use that often. The important one is the red lights. As you can see, that activates the red stop lights all around the track. We have to make sure that the minimum number of lights are operative, and so on and so forth. We've got the famous 2-minute bell there, the 2-minute light that tells everybody the 2 minutes is running in theory, and then this works in conjunction with the tapes. You switch the green light on to tell the riders that they're about ready to start. Then after the minimum 2 seconds, press the button and in theory the tapes go up. It's as simple as that, really.
All of that is under your control completely?
It is, yeah. There's nobody else theoretically is allowed to touch that during the course of a meeting.
Now tonight you've also got an extra piece of equipment because Sky are filming this evening, and so we're actually getting a monitor up here and you're able to see the replays of any incidents.
Yes, we've got 2 pieces of equipment here actually. There's the straightforward monitor where we do get views of incidents that actually happen. Whether or not they're a help to you very much depends upon the circumstances, because it is true to say that the camera does lie on occasions and you can get a false impression of what's really happened because of the long focus lenses that they use. So they assist you, but they don't necessarily make your mind up for you completely. And then on top is what they call in the trade the squeak box, and this is a direct line to the director of the TV programme. He gives me instructions over there to let me know what's going on with the TV broadcast, and if I need to tell him what's going on, that there's a tactical change or something like that, then you just switch that button there and it goes straight through to the TV control room. But again, it's something that's there if you really need it, but hopefully you get by the evening without bothering it.
I believe you're not entirely on your own in the box. There is somebody else here to give you assistance, is that true?
It depends what you call assistance, really. Every track's different because the circumstances of the box, where it's placed and where the other officials have to be, determine who's in the box with you. Here I've basically just got the incident recorder and the timekeeper, and he sits just here, and what he does is that he fills in one of the statutory forms that we have to deal with, where every single accident, even if it's just a minor fall, is recorded, and he also gives the times to the announcer to announce them to the crowd. But that is the only assistance that we have, if you call that assistance, really. When it comes down to the decisions, you're really completely on your own, as it should be.
Absolutely. Well, I know it's quiet at the moment because we're about an hour and a half before start time. We're going to take a trip down to the pits now, and you'll make your preparations in a way by having a quick look at the machines and in particular checking the tyres, I believe.
Yes, one of the things that we have to do is make sure all the tyres are marked for each of the meetings, so that it all stems from a problem a few years ago that was well publicised, where maybe there was some maltreatment of the tyres before the meeting, and this is basically just a check and a mark on the tyres to make sure that we all start with a level playing field. Yeah, Max, we've got one left.
You've got one left, okay, Tony.
Tony, you've now actually signed those tyres, but there's a couple of other marks on there. Could you just explain what that all actually means?
Well, yeah, it's not really rocket science, actually. The tyres have to be marked in accordance with the regulations to represent the meeting that we're at, which is why Poole's on there, and then the date of the meeting. And what it means is there's several identification marks, so that if the validity of a tyre is called into question later in the meeting, we've got several ways of checking to make sure at least we've got somewhere close to the right one.
And obviously those marks are indelible, they can't be rubbed off.
I would never actually go as far as to say that, because the wonders of modern science and all that, you never know what's going to happen, but you need somebody that's got a fair array of colour pens in the pockets if they're going to change it, because there are different colours everywhere every week, so it serves its purpose.
Well, Tony's job in the pits is quite a short one, but he now has to go out and have a look at the track, and a very important part of what he has to do this evening will revolve around his track inspection.
The object of the exercise is complete safety when you're looking at the track, and we're checking the surface to make sure that it's fairly consistent. The best way you can describe it, what you don't want, is rice puddings, because if you're riding on a hard piece of track and then suddenly go into something that's really soft, that's when the riders pick up grip, lose control, and that's when you have the accidents that you don't really want. But as you can see from this, they've got the outside nicely ripped up to give you a bit of extra grip if you're out on the banking, and if you have a look at the inside, it's slightly slicker. It's really quite heavily tie packed, so that again anybody who's got a lot of power on isn't going to lose control when they power out of the bends or power into them. So this is as safe really as you find a surface on any track these days.
I've got to say this looks very much like the way that Poole's been prepared this year. It looks consistent and it looks as though a lot of work's gone into it, even though sometimes the fans do criticise.
It's not that easy for me to comment on that, because obviously we only come to the track 2 or 3 times a season, and I only get to Poole maybe once or twice myself, so I can only judge it what happened last week and what happened next week. You always actually have to put out of your mind. and I can only really judge it by how it looks tonight, and this actually looks as good as you're likely to get, particularly bearing in mind the type of season that we're experiencing with a lot of wet weather coming in. They've got to take that into account when they prepare the track and expect a little bit, so that we're not going to get a meeting called off because it's too heavy when we get a slight shower. Similarly, it's quite a fine balance, because if we get too little shale on it and it becomes hard too quickly, it then turns into a skating rink if you get a comparatively small amount of water, and again the meeting tends to have to be called off. But this looks as though it's just about spot on, really.
Now, it isn't just the track that we're looking at, of course, because apart from the track, we've also got to make sure that the safety fence is all in order.
Yeah, it's one of the things you have to bear in mind, that at most speedway circuits, the speedway promoter is just a tenant and he hasn't got control of the stadium 7 days a week. So things can change, particularly if there's dogs or stock cars, where the contractor might have come in during the week and made an alteration and not told anybody. So you have to make sure that the safety fence complies with the regulations, is the right height and hasn't got anything protruding from it that's likely to cause injury. But the other important area is the 2 metre zone, which is the other side of the safety fence, where if anything goes wrong, a rider can be thrown into the fence, through it or over it. You've got to make sure it's clear of obstructions and there's nothing in there that's going to cause them injury, and that is one of the areas where we have the biggest problems, because, as I say, things change from week to week. You get deliveries, all sorts of things, and they find the free space and just put them there, and unless you're on top of it all the time, genuine mistakes do happen, but they can be very costly if somebody doesn't pick them up. That there's an obstruction there where it's normally packed.
Yes.
And the packing's come off during the week while some work's being carried out on the electrics, and it hasn't been put back, and that's typical of the sort of thing you just need to try and pick up.
Yeah, we will. There's no point. I will have it. You can't have it like this on the first back every 20 yards. The rest of it like this. I know. It's actually better than it was about 20 minutes ago, because it was like a trampoline. You were jumping up and down.
As you can see, one of the things that is the start's all important to all of the riders in the race, and one of the things that we have to do is to try and make sure all of the starting gates are consistent, so everybody gets the same sort of drive. And there's a bit of concern because obviously, for whatever reason, a little bit too much moisture has got into the track where gate 3 is, so we need to go and find the clerk of the course now to ask him what they're going to do about it and do a little bit of work on it to even it up.
Now, Tony, we've had a look at the track, we've seen what's up there in the referee's box. Finally, when you do make those hard decisions, and they are tough, some of them, and you only get one stab at it, as it were, do you feel that you have a trained eye for being able to see a problem and being able to sort out the root cause?
I really can't be the judge of that, really. You've got to ask other people. A referee's no different to a rider. However good you were yesterday, you're only as good as your last race, and obviously I can only speak for myself. I put as much into it as I can, and when I come to do this job, I come to work, not just for a night out, and I try to do it as properly and as professionally as I can. Obviously you do make mistakes and you get things wrong, because although the view, as you've seen from the box here, is quite a good one of the track, that isn't always the same, because, as I've said before, the speedway promoter is quite often a tenant, and he has to deal with what the cards are that he's been dealt, and it's not always possible to have a referee's box in a perfect position. So the important thing is, I think, that you have to always try and be consistent, and it's probably the only sport where there's a requirement in the rule book for you to give an explanation for your decision to the team manager, or indeed the rider. You're not under any obligation to speak to a rider, but personally I always like to do so, because if if somebody had crashed into me at 80 miles an hour and I was lying on the floor and I saw my exclusion light on, I don't think I'd be very happy either, and he may not see it the same way as I do, but I think everybody deserves an explanation so that they understand why you've done what you've done, even if they don't necessarily agree with you. And it's the same with the fans, really. I never have a problem explaining to fans why I've actually done something, although strictly speaking the regulations say that you shouldn't discuss anything once the matter is closed afterwards, but it doesn't do any harm at all. I always feel that a referee's position in Speedway has always been an over-kept secret really, and if people understood a little bit more about what they had to do and why they had to do it and the circumstances in which they actually had to do their job, I think that they would probably see a completely different side of it and not necessarily have sympathy, because I like nothing better myself on a day off to pay and go in and go home mumbling about the referee, so that will never go away. But I think there might be a greater understanding of the difficulties with the job, and as you've done tonight, you know, I always welcome people who are interested in seeing what really happens.
It's certainly been an insight, and as we said, it is a thankless task. Not many people would like to do it. We're glad that you do it, and you do it so well. You took away my last question, because I was going to ask you, when you come here after an evening, do you ever go and watch Speedway for enjoyment? And you've clearly said yes.
Oh yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think you've got to have a feeling for the sport, and I probably go to watch as many meetings as a referee without any shadow of a doubt, and that's not just for pure enjoyment. A lot of it's because some tracks, as I've said to you, you don't get to referee as often as you would like, and by going round to the different tracks and watching where the incidents happen, you get a better insight as to where problems might occur and why they might unfold, and that always helps you when you go back to referee.
Well, our gratitude to Tony for being so frank and revealing about his job, which, as I have already said, is of course a very thankless one. Well, Tony leaves us and he's gone straight into the thick of it. He's in the middle of a rider conference right now, and his job has already started. As I say, we're about an hour away from racing right now, and he's right in the middle of the thick of the riders. We'll be back to the racing in just a moment.